Rule 1 of the Cresset Watch is written in the first line of the standing orders, and every man who wears the silver gorget learns it before he learns his own post. A sentry of the inner hall does not leave his mark. Not for fire, not for fainting, not for the cry of a friend. You hold the square of stone they assign you the way a keystone holds an arch, by not moving, ever, no matter the weight that comes down. I had stood my mark in the Cresset Gallery of Harrowgate Palace for 11 years, and in all that time I had broken Rule 1 exactly once. This is the account of that night, set down because the Queen herself asked me to write it plainly, so that whatever men say of me in the corridors will at least have the truth to argue against. It began, as these things do, with nothing. A Thursday evening in the cold end of autumn, the kind when the long windows of the gallery sweat at their edges and the braziers do little but glow. I had the second watch, the hours from the striking of 9 until the changing at 2, on the mark outside the Cresset Hall where the Queen of Eldermoor takes her private counsel. I will tell you what that mark is, because the whole of what follows hangs on it. The Cresset Gallery is a corridor 100 paces long, lined on the left with the tall mullioned windows that look down on the south court, and on the right with the council doors, the great double doors of carved black oak that open into the hall. My mark is a single flagstone, paler than the rest, set into the floor a sword's length to the right of those doors. From it I can see the length of the gallery in both directions. I cannot see into the hall. That is by design. The men of the Cresset Watch are placed to guard the threshold, not to overhear the crown. A guardsman who has stood one mark for 11 years comes to know it the way a farmer knows his field. I knew the draft that moved along the floor when the south court doors below were opened. I knew the particular complaint of the third hinge on the council doors, which the palace joiners had oiled 100 times, and which sang anyway. I knew that the Queen, when she was tired, set her heels down harder on the stone, and that the boy, Prince Joran, who was 10 that autumn and not yet grown into the gravity his sister already carried at 8, dragged the toe of his left boot when he was bored, a small scuffing rhythm that I had heard 1,000 times and had never once acknowledged, because acknowledging a sound is the first crack in stillness. I tell you all this so you understand what kind of man I was before that night, and why what I did was not a thing of impulse. I am not a man of impulse. The Cresset Watch does not keep men of impulse. It grinds them out in the first year. I am a man who notices and who does not move. The two together are the whole of the art. The Queen's council that night was small. I knew the faces as they passed my mark, because part of holding a threshold is knowing who crosses it. Lord Steward Vance Harlow came first, a heavy, deliberate man with a steward's chain and a way of looking at the guards as though we were furniture that had learned to breathe. Then the treasurer, old Pemberton, who nodded to me once, a small breach of his own dignity that I had always quietly respected. Then the mistress of the cabinet, a thin, bright-eyed woman named Dorothy Quill, who carried the council's papers, and who, I had noticed over the past months, had begun to carry rather more of them than the council seemed to produce. And last, the man I will call by his title only, the Chamberlain of the Wardrobe, Sir Edrin Mallow, because the title is what matters and because, by the end of this account, you will understand why I do not wish to honor him with anything warmer. The Queen entered last of all, as she always did, with the prince beside her. She did not bring the children to council often, but Joran was 10, and Eldermoor's crown passes to the eldest, and Saralind of Harrowgate was a queen who believed a boy should learn the weight of a thing by carrying a corner of it early. So Joran came that night to sit at the foot of the council table and listen, and learned that the kingdom was mostly ledgers and argument and very little of the gold, and trumpets a 10-year-old Imagines. He scuffed his boot on the threshold as he passed me. I did not look down. The doors closed. The third hinge sang, and I stood my mark, and the night began the way every night of 11 years had begun, with nothing. It is the nothing I want you to feel, because the whole horror of what I came to understand is built out of it. A guardsman's hours are made of nothing, and in that nothing, if he is any good, he keeps a second kind of watch, the one no order describes. He listens to the shape of the building. He learns its ordinary, so that the extraordinary, when it comes, lands on him like a struck bell. The first wrong note came at perhaps 10:15. It was the south court doors below. I have said I know the draft that moves along the floor when they open, a thin cold finger that crosses my ankles and is gone. The doors below should not have opened. The council was sitting. The palace was closing for the night. The south court is the queen's private entrance and is barred at 9. But the cold finger crossed my ankles, and somewhere 2 floors down a door that should have been barred had let the autumn in. I did not move. A guardsman who startles at a draft is no guardsman. I noted it, and I kept it. The way you keep a stone in your boot you have decided not to stop and remove. The south court doors had opened after the bar. Someone had a key who should not have been using it, or someone had been let in. The second wrong note came perhaps 10 minutes after the first, and it was a footstep. The Cresset Gallery has one entrance at the far north end, by the King's Stair, and one at the south end, by the small servants' passage that the maids used to bring the council its water and coals. The proper traffic of the night came from the north, the relief watch, the lamplighter, the steward's runners. From the south came only the maids, and only at the quarter hours, and they came in pairs and they came loud, because the housekeeper drilled them never to startle a sentry. The footstep came from the south alone, and it came quiet. Not the soft-souled quiet of a maid in felt slippers, the deliberate quiet of a person who has chosen to be quiet, the held breath of weight set down with care. I have heard men move like that. I learned to hear it in a harder service than this one, before the silver gorget, in years I do not put in the palace records. A man who moves quiet on purpose is a man who does not want a sentry to mark him. And I marked him. He came up out of the southern dark slowly, keeping to the wall where the brazier light did not reach, and for a long moment I could see only that he was a man and that he wore the gray of the household staff. Then he crossed a panel of window light, and I knew the gray was wrong. The household grays are fustian, plain and a little shabby at the cuff, because the palace does not waste good cloth on men who carry coal. This gray had a sheen to it. It was good wool dyed to look like poor wool, and a guardsman who has stood 11 years in a palace learns the difference between cloth that is gray and cloth that is pretending. He carried a covered tray, the sort the kitchens send up with a council's late refreshment, and that was wrong too, because the council's refreshment had gone up at 9 with 2 maids who had laughed at something in the stairwell, and a sitting council is not served twice. I want to be exact about what I knew at that moment, because everything I am charged with turns on it, and I will not pretend I knew more than I did. I knew the south court doors had opened after the bar. I knew a man was crossing my gallery from the wrong direction, at the wrong hour, dressed in cloth that lied, carrying a tray no one had ordered. I did not know who he was. I did not know what was under the cloth on the tray. I did not know there was a scheme or a name behind it, or that 2 people I had spent 11 years not looking at were about to need me to do the one thing I was forbidden to do. I knew only that the ordinary had cracked, and through the crack something was coming toward the doors of the Cresset Hall. Here is Rule 2 of the Cresset Watch, and you must have it to understand my night. A sentry of the inner hall does not challenge a member of the household. The men who serve the palace come and go past our marks 100 times a day, and if a sentry challenged every gray coat and every covered tray, the work of the house would stop and the dignity of the watch would drown in it. So the standing orders are plain. The household passes freely. The sentry holds his mark and his silence. Only a stranger, an armed man, or a forced door earns a challenge, and even then the sentry calls for the watch sergeant and does not leave his stone. We are not police. We are the still point. The moving of the world is somebody else's office. So the rules that night told me 3 things, and all 3 were wrong. The rules told me the gray coat was household, and household passes freely. The rules told me the tray was kitchen business, and kitchen business is not a sentry's concern. The rules told me to hold my mark and my silence, and to call the sergeant only if the man laid hand to the council doors against the Queen's leave, and not before, and not by leaving my stone. I have turned that night over in my mind 1,000 times since. The way a man turns a coin he is not sure is true. And every time, I come back to the same hard thing. If I had obeyed the standing orders of the Cresset Watch, the orders I had kept faithfully for 11 years, the orders that are the whole of a sentry's honor, the man in the lying gray would have reached the doors of the Cresset Hall, and the Queen of Eldermoor and her son would have been alone in a closed room with what he carried, and I would have stood on my pale stone and watched it happen, because the rules said the watching was all that was mine to do. The gray coat came on, 40 paces, 30. And I did the first wrong thing, the small one, the one that was still inside the letter of my orders if you read them charitably. I shifted my eyes. A sentry of the Cresset Watch holds his gaze forward and level. It is part of the stillness. I dropped mine, half an inch to the tray. The cloth over it was not kitchen cloth. The kitchens use a coarse undyed linen, and they tuck it under the rim all the way round so nothing slides on the stairs. This cloth was laid over the top and left loose at the near edge, the way you cover a thing you mean to lift the cover from quickly. And under the loose edge, where the brazier light caught it for the length of one of the man's careful steps, I saw the dull gray-blue gleam of metal that was not a serving dish. I have stood close to a great many weapons in my life. I knew the gleam. 20 paces. The man's eyes came up to mine, and that was the third wrong note and the worst of them, because the eyes of the household never come up to a sentry's. A maid, a footman, a coal boy, they pass our marks with their gaze down or sideways, because a man who is paid to move past stillness learns not to meet its eyes, the way you do not look a standing horse in the face. This man looked straight at me. He looked at me the way one professional looks at another across a room, measuring, and I understood in that single-held glance that he had marked me as I had marked him, that he knew exactly what I was and exactly what my orders bound me to, and that he was counting on those orders the way a thief counts on a lock he has already studied. He was counting on Rule 2. He was counting on 11 years of a discipline so perfect that it had become, to men like him, a thing to be used. The Cresset sentry holds his mark. The Cresset sentry does not challenge the household. The Cresset sentry is the most reliable fixture in the palace, and the most reliable fixture in the palace was, that night, the last door between a queen and what lay under that loose gray cloth, and it had been built, by its own famous discipline, never to close. 10 paces, and closing, and his hand drifting to the loose edge of the cloth. I will tell you what was in my mind, because the Queen asked for the truth, and the truth is not heroic. I was not thinking of honor. I was thinking, with the cold, flat clarity that the old harder service had drilled into me long before the silver gorget, that in perhaps 4 seconds a man with a weapon under a lie was going to put his hand on the doors of a room that held a woman I had served for 11 years, and a boy whose board boot I had heard scuff that very stone a quarter hour before. And I was thinking the one thought that the standing orders of the Cresset Watch exist, above all else, to forbid. I was thinking, I will have to move. There is a thing that happens to a man who has held perfect stillness for 11 years in the instant he decides to break it. It is not freedom, it is grief. The stillness is not a posture you put on. By the 11th year it is the shape of your bones, and to break it is to break yourself, and you feel the snap of it in your chest like a green branch giving way. I felt it. I want that on the record too, for the men who will say I broke my oath lightly. There was nothing light in it. I broke 11 years across my own knee in the space of a single breath, and it hurt the way an honest thing hurts. And then I moved. I did not draw. The standing orders are emphatic that a Cresset sentry does not draw inside the gallery except on a sounded alarm, and there had been no alarm, and besides a drawn blade in a corridor toward a man whose own weapon was already half uncovered, is the way to start the very killing you are trying to prevent. I had learned in the harder service that the first object is not to win the fight. The first object is to put your body where the harm is going before the harm gets there. So I left my mark. I stepped off the pale stone, the first time in 11 years that boot had come off that flag while the post was mine, and I put myself between the gray coat and the doors of the Cresset Hall, 3 quick strides that ate the gallery, and I stood there with my back to the council I was sworn never to enter and my eyes on the man who had counted on me not to. "That tray," I said, "goes nowhere but the floor." My own voice startled me. A Cresset sentry does not speak. 11 years I had not spoken on my mark, and the words came out of me rough and strange, as if another man were using my mouth. But they landed. I saw them land. The gray coat stopped 4 paces off, and the measuring look in his eyes changed, recalculated, because the lock he had studied had just walked off the wall and stood in his road. For a moment neither of us moved, and in that moment the whole architecture of his plan, whatever it was, hung between us in the brazier light, and I watched him decide whether to gamble it on rushing one unarmed sentry who had thrown away his orders. He was good. I will grant him that to the end. A lesser man would have run, and a lesser man would have lunged, and he did neither for the length of 3 slow heartbeats. He weighed me, and in those 3 heartbeats the third hinge of the council doors behind me began, very faintly, to sing. The doors were opening. Someone inside had heard my voice. That changed his sum. A man who has come quiet to do quiet work cannot afford a door full of witnesses, and he knew it the instant the hinge sang, and the professional in him made the only clean choice left to a spoiled plan. He abandoned it. He let the cloth fall back over the gleam, turned on his heel with a speed that told me everything about what was under it, and went back down the gallery the way he had come, not running, never running, but moving with the long covering stride of a man putting distance between himself and a thing gone wrong. By the time the council doors stood fully open at my back, he had reached the southern dark, and by the time the watch sergeant's whistle finally shrilled up the king's stair, he was gone into the body of the palace as if he had never crossed it at all. I did not chase him. This too I am charged with, and this too I will defend. My orders, broken or kept, had only ever had one purpose, the threshold and what stood behind it. And the threshold was open now, and the Queen of Eldermoor was standing in it looking at her sentry off his mark for the first time in 11 years, with her son's hand in hers and her council rising in alarm behind her. And I was not going to leave that doorway undefended to run down a corridor after a man I might not catch. The still point does not abandon the center to chase the edge. That much of the Cresset discipline I kept even in the act of breaking the rest. "Sergeant Carrow," the Queen said. She knew all our names. It was one of the things about her. Her voice was level, but I had heard that voice level over 11 years across every kind of weather, and I knew the difference between her calm and her calm. This was the second kind, the kind underlaid with iron. "You have left your post." "Yes, Majesty," I said. "You spoke on your mark." "Yes, Majesty." Behind her, Lord Steward Harlow had pushed to the front, his steward's chain swinging, his heavy face gone red. "He left his mark and shouted in the gallery like a fishwife," Harlow said, to the council and not to me, in the particular voice powerful men use when they have decided a smaller man's ruin will be convenient. "There is no household business in the South Passage at this hour. The man has lost his nerve, or his wits. Whatever he imagined, he has broken the first standing order of the Cresset Watch in front of the crown, and he will answer for it." I said nothing to that. There was nothing yet to say that would not sound like the fear of a man covering his own fault, and I had learned long ago that a man with the truth on his side need not be the loudest in the room. I stood in the doorway I had no right to stand in, and I waited, and I felt the eyes of the whole council on me, and I knew, with the same cold clarity that had told me the cloth was lying, that I had just stepped off more than a flagstone. I had stepped off the safe, silent, honorable ground I had stood on for 11 years, and out into the open, where men like Harlow could see me, and where the truth of that gray coat was now the only thing in the world standing between me and disgrace. The trouble was that the truth had just walked out the South Passage and taken its tray with it. And the second trouble, the one I did not yet understand, the one that would take the rest of that long night and the harder days after to drag into the light, was that the man in the lying gray had not invented himself. Someone in the palace had dressed him and keyed the South Court doors for him, and known the hour the council sat and the boy would be in the room. Someone who could do all that was not in the South Passage. Someone who could do all that was standing in the Cresset Hall behind the Queen, watching her sentry take the blame. The watch sergeant came up the King's Stair with 4 men, and the lamplighter trailing behind them, and the gallery filled with the noise that follows the breaking of a quiet boots, questions, the rasp of drawn steel being checked and sheathed again when it found nothing to bite. My sergeant that night was a hard-handed veteran named Aller, 20 years in the watch, a man who had drilled me on this very mark when I was a green guardsman who still flinched at sudden things. He took one look at me standing off my flagstone in the open doorway, and his face did a thing I had never seen it do. It fell. "Off your mark, Carrow," he said quietly, coming close so the council would not hear. "Tell me there's a body in this corridor. Tell me there's a drawn weapon. Give me something to hang it on, lad, because right now the only thing I can see is a Cresset man off his stone, and you know what that is." "There was a man," I said. "Gray coat, household cut, but the cloth was wrong, good wool dyed poor. Came up the South Passage alone and quiet after the South Court doors opened below the bar. Carried a covered kitchen tray with a weapon under the cloth. I saw the metal. He was making for the council doors, and I put myself in his road. When the doors started to open, he abandoned it and went back down south. He'll be in the palace still, or out a servant's gate by now." Aller's eyes went down the dark of the South Passage and came back. He had served too long to dismiss a thing because it was inconvenient, and he had drilled me too long to think me a man who broke under boredom. But I watched him weigh it, the way I had watched the gray coat weigh me, and I watched him reach the same hard arithmetic. "A man no one else saw," he said. "A weapon no one can find. A tray that walked off down a passage with no door at the end but the laundry court and the kitchen stair, both of which my men are standing in right now and both of which are empty." He blew out a slow breath. "You believe it. I can see you believe it. But belief isn't evidence, and a Cresset man off his mark is a fact you can put your hand on. Do you understand the size of what you've done?" I understood it. I had understood it before my boot left the stone. They took me off the watch that night, of course. A sentry who has left his mark cannot stand it again until the matter is settled, and the matter was very far from settled. Aller posted a relief on my flagstone, young Carrow, who had stood it perhaps a dozen times, and who looked at me as he took it the way men look at a thing they are afraid is catching. And he walked me down to the guardroom under the King's Stair, and sat me on the bench there, and told me, not unkindly, that I was confined to barracks until the Lord Steward's inquiry, and that I should think very carefully before I told my story to anyone who could write it down. It was Lord Steward Harlow who would hold the inquiry. I learned that within the hour, and it landed on me harder than the confinement. The discipline of the Cresset Watch belongs, by the old charter, to the Lord Steward of the household, and the Lord Steward of the household was the heavy red-faced man who had stood in the doorway naming me a coward before the council, the man who had decided, in the first 10 seconds, that my ruin would be convenient. I did not yet know why it was convenient. I only knew that the judge of my breaking of the rules was a man who had already, publicly, declared the verdict. I sat in the guardroom through the cold, small hours, and I did what a guardsman does. I went over the ground. The South Court doors had opened below the bar. I had felt the draft cross my ankles. To open those doors after 9 you needed the South Key, and the South Key hung on the steward's ring, and the steward's ring belonged to the office of the Lord Steward. That was one thread, and it went straight to Harlow, and I did not trust it, because the simplest thread is the one a clever man leaves for you to pull. A man who keys a door for an assassin does not key it with his own ring and then hold the inquiry into the man who stopped it. That is not how guilt behaves. Guilt hides. The south key thread was too easy, and I set it aside, not as cleared but as suspicious in its very convenience. The gray coat itself was the truer thread. Good wool dyed to look poor, that is not a thing a man does for himself. The household grays come from the palace stores, issued and tallied by the office of the wardrobe, and a coat made special, of better cloth, cut to the household pattern and dyed down to pass, that is a commission. Someone had ordered that coat made, and ordering cloth made was the work of one office in Harrowgate Palace. The wardrobe, Sir Edrin Mallow's office. The chamberlain of the wardrobe, who had sat at the Queen's council that very night, 4 paces from the boy, while his own commissioned coat came up the south passage with a weapon under a tray. I have said I would honor him only with his title. Here is the first reason. As I sat in that cold guardroom fitting the threads together, I told myself I was reaching, that a dyed coat could come from a dozen hands, that I wanted a villain and was building one out of cloth. A guardsman learns to distrust the story that flatters his own innocence. So I held the wardrobe thread loosely too, the way I held the south key thread, and I resolved to do the one thing my training and my long stillness had made me fit for above all other men. I resolved to watch. I could not leave the barracks, but the barracks of the Cresset Watch sit under the King's Stair, and the King's Stair is the spine of the palace's east wing, and a man confined to a guardroom can still hear the building if he has spent 11 years learning its sounds. And I had one thing the Lord Steward did not know I had, because the Lord Steward thought of guardsmen as furniture that had learned to breathe. I had 11 years of knowing exactly who crossed which threshold, and when, and how. Toward 4 in the morning, with the inquiry 6 hours off and my career hanging by a thread thinner than the lying coat, a fellow guardsman slipped into the guardroom with a covered bowl, ostensibly bringing me something hot. His name was Den, and he had stood beside me on 100 ceremonial details, and he was the nearest thing to a friend the Cresset discipline allows, which is to say we had stood silent together for years, and trusted each other the way men trust a wall at their back. He set the bowl down and did not look at me while he spoke, the old habit of men used to being watched. "The whole barracks is talking, Carrow," he murmured. "Half of them say you cracked, the other half," he hesitated, "the other half served beside you long enough to know you don't crack, but it doesn't matter what we think. Harlow's already had your relief, young Carrow, in to give a statement, and the word from the steward's runners is that Carrow's saying he was told you've been strange all week. Jumpy, seeing things." I had not been strange all week. I had stood my mark in perfect silence as I had for 11 years. But I felt the trap of it close another inch, because a coward's defense and a hero's are told in the same words. There was a man, you didn't see him, trust me, and Harlow was already laying the ground to make mine sound like the first. "Den," I said, "I need you to do something, and it has to look like nothing." He glanced at the door. "Go on." The wardrobe issues the household grays and tallies them. Every coat is numbered into a store's book. I need to know if a coat was issued this past month that doesn't tally, a coat made special, of better cloth than the stores buy, or a number drawn that has no man's name against it. You can't ask. If you ask, it gets back to Mallow before the ink's dry. You have to find a reason to be near the store's book that has nothing to do with me. Den was quiet a moment, then he said, "And if I find it?" "Then we have a thread," I said. "That doesn't lead where the easy one leads, and we'll need it, because in 6 hours Lord Steward Harlow is going to ask me to explain why a Cresset man left his mark, and the only true answer I have walked out the south passage and took the proof with it." The inquiry was held that morning in the steward's court, a high cold chamber off the east wing where the discipline of the household has been administered since the palace was raised. I had stood guard at its door 100 times and never once been inside it. Now I stood inside it as the man accused, and I learned that a room looks very different when you are its subject rather than its sentry. They had made it a proper court. That was the first thing I understood about how the morning would go. A simple matter, a sentry off his mark, a fright in the night, no harm done, could have been settled by Sergeant Aller with a reprimand and a week's extra duty. Harlow had not made it simple. He had convened the full apparatus. A long table on a dais, the household officers ranged along it, a clerk with a book, 2 guardsmen of a different watch at the door to remind everyone that I was the one on trial. He had made it large because he wanted it to be large. A reprimand is forgotten by spring. A man broken in a full court of the household is broken for good, and the breaking is remembered, and the memory does the work the breaker wants done long after the man himself is gone. Lord Steward Harlow sat at the center of the dais with his chain across his chest and his heavy hands flat on the table, and he opened the inquiry in a voice pitched to fill the room. "This court sits," he said, "upon a grave matter. A sentry of the Cresset Watch, the most disciplined service in this kingdom, the still guardians of the crown's own threshold, abandoned his post last night. He left his mark. He raised his voice in the gallery. He thrust himself, uninvited and unordered, against the very doors of the Queen's private council. There is no dispute of these facts. The man does not deny them. He cannot, for the Queen herself and her council and her son saw him do it. He let that sit. The only question before this court is whether there is any cause that could excuse the inexcusable, and I will tell you plainly before we begin that in 40 years of the household service I have never heard of one." He had built his case in a single breath and built it well. The facts were mine. He had only to deny me a cause, and a sentry off his mark with no cause is a sentry who has failed, and a Cresset man who fails fails utterly, because the whole of what we are is the not failing. Then he turned to me, and his heavy face arranged itself into the patience of a reasonable man giving an unreasonable one his chance. "Sergeant Carrow, you will tell the court why you left your mark." So I told them. I told it plainly as I have told it here, the draft of the South Court doors below the bar, the quiet footstep from the wrong direction, the gray coat that was good wool dyed poor, the uncalled-for tray, the gleam of metal under the loose cloth, the eyes that came up to mine when the household's eyes never do. I told them I had judged, in the 4 seconds I had, that a man with a weapon under a lie was about to lay his hand on the doors of a room that held the Queen and the Prince, and that the standing orders of the Cresset Watch, faithfully kept, would have had me stand on my stone and watch it happen. I told them I had chosen to put my body in the harm's road rather than my silence, and that I would, knowing the cost, choose it again. I thought it was a good account. It was a true one. I had not understood yet that in a court built to break me, the truth and a good account were the 2 things that would be used hardest against me. "A man," said Harlow when I had finished. He did not raise his voice. He had no need to. "A man in a gray coat, a weapon you saw for the length of a single step under a cloth in the dark, a man who, by your own account, then vanished down a passage that ends in 2 rooms, both of which the watch sergeant's own men searched within minutes and found empty." He turned his heavy head slowly, taking in the ranged officers, drawing them with him. "Tell me, Sergeant, did anyone else in this palace, anyone at all, see this man?" "No, my lord." "Did the watch find the coat?" "No, my lord." "The tray?" "No, my lord." "The weapon you say you saw, the metal under the cloth in the dark, for the length of a single step, did anyone recover it?" "No, my lord." "So," he spread his flat hands, a gesture of terrible reasonableness, "we have a sentry who left his sacred mark, the one act forbidden above all others to his service, and the whole of his cause is a man no one else saw, carrying a weapon no one can find, who escaped through rooms that were empty. Sergeant Carrow, I do not call you a liar. I call you something I have seen before and which is, in its way, sadder. I call you a man who has stood 11 years in a silent corridor staring at the same stone, and who, one cold night, with a draft on his ankles and the quiet pressing on him, saw a thing that was not there. The mind does this to sentinels. It is why we change the watch every few hours. You did not fail from malice. You failed from the slow erosion of a post that asks too much of a man for too long. It is no shame to you as a man, but it is the end of you as a Cresset guard. And there it was. He had not even called me a coward in the end. He had found something more dangerous, more merciful sounding, harder to fight. He had called me mad. Not a man who broke his oath, but a man whose long, perfect service had finally cracked his mind, who had hallucinated a threat and disgraced his post chasing a phantom. It was a verdict no protest could touch, because every protest, there was a man, I saw the metal, trust me, was exactly what a man unstrung by a long watch would say. He had built me a cell out of my own truth, and locked it with my own faithful 11 years. I felt the room turn. I had stood enough courts as a sentry to feel the moment an assembly settles its mind, the small collective shift of weight, and I felt it settle now against me, not in cruelty but in something worse, in pity. They believed the kind story. It cost them nothing and it made them feel humane. The good guardsman, worn out, gently retired. Even Aller, at the side of the room, had dropped his eyes. Harlow lifted his hand to the clerk to begin recording the finding. And from the door of the steward's court a clear young voice said, "He's not mad. I saw the man too." The whole room turned. Prince Joran stood in the doorway in his plain morning coat, his chin up in the way of a boy who has worked himself to a decision and is afraid it will be taken from him before he can say it. Behind him, a step back, stood the Queen, and I understood at once that she had let him come, that she had walked him here herself and stood aside at the door to let him speak first, because Saralind of Harrowgate believed a boy should learn the weight of a thing by carrying his corner of it, and the boy had asked to carry this. Harlow rose half out of his chair. "Your Highness, this is no place for—" "I saw him," Joran said again louder, "and he came into the room. He was 10. His voice did the thing a 10-year-old's voice does when it is being brave, climbing and cracking and holding anyway. When the doors opened, Sergeant Carrow was standing in front of them in the gallery off his stone, and there was a man going away down the dark end fast, in a gray coat. I saw the back of him before he was gone. Mother saw me look. Ask her." "A boy," Harlow said, recovering, smoothing his voice back to its reasonable register, "saw the back of a figure in a dark corridor in a moment of fright, after a sentry had already cried out that there was a man. Your Highness, I do not doubt you believe it. But a frightened boy who is told there is a man will see a man. It is the same trick the mind plays on the tired sentry. It proves nothing but that you are loyal to a guardsman you are fond of, which does you credit and does the law no service at all." It was deftly done. He had folded the boy's witness into his own theory without raising his voice. A fright, a suggestion, a loyal child. And I saw Joran's face crumple at the edges, the particular helplessness of a child who has told the truth and watched a grown man make it sound like a story. He had spent his courage and it had bought nothing, and he knew it, and that was worse for me to watch than anything Harlow had said about my own mind. Then the Queen stepped through the door. I have served Saralind of Harrowgate for 11 years, and I have seen her in every kind of weather a crown brings joy and grief, ceremony and exhaustion, the public mask and rarely the private face beneath it. I had never seen her angry the way she was angry coming into that room. It was not a hot anger. The dangerous ones never are. She came in quietly, and she crossed to stand beside her son, and she put one hand on his shoulder, and she looked at the Lord Steward down the length of the cold chamber, and the room went very still, the way the gallery goes still on a winter night. "Lord Steward," she said, "you will not speak to my son as though his eyes are children's toys. He told you what he saw. He saw a man in a gray coat leaving by the south. So did I." The silence changed quality. An accused sentry is one thing. A prince's fright is one thing. The Queen of Eldermoor, sworn witness in her own household's court, is another thing entirely, and Harlow felt the floor of his careful case shift under him. But he was not a fool, and he had not built that case to be undone by one witness, even a crowned one. He inclined his head with great respect, and when he spoke it was with the deference of a loyal servant grieved to differ. Majesty, that you saw a figure I do not doubt for an instant. But Majesty, forgive me, what did any of us see? A back, a gray coat of which this palace issues 200, a man moving quickly in a dark corridor after an alarm had been raised. No one in this room, not the prince, not your majesty, not the sentry himself, saw a face. No one saw a weapon save the sentry alone for the length of a single step. And no man, no coat, no tray, and no weapon has been found, though the watch searched within minutes. He spread his hands again, that terrible reasonableness. I do not deny a figure crossed the gallery. I say only that we cannot know what it was, a confused servant. A man who fled because a sentry suddenly bellowed at him in the dark and feared he'd done wrong, and that we cannot, on the strength of a glimpsed coat, overturn the one certain fact of this matter, that a Cresset man left his sacred mark. The crown's own safety depends on that mark being held. If we excuse its breaking on a glimpse, we teach every sentry in this palace that the orders may be set aside whenever a man feels a fright. Majesty, with the greatest love I bear this crown, that way lies far more danger than one gray coat. And here is the thing I have to set down honestly, because it is the hinge of the whole night. He was not entirely wrong, and that was the cleverest part of all. The Cresset discipline is the crown's safety. A watch where every man decides for himself when the orders bend is no watch at all. Harlow had wrapped his lie inside a truth so sound that to attack the lie I would have to seem to attack the truth, to argue against the very discipline that was the whole of my honor. He had made my defense sound like an argument for chaos. I saw the queen feel it. I saw her weigh it. She was a just queen, and a just queen does not bend the law because she is fond of a guardsman, and she knew that as well as Harlow did, and Harlow had counted on her knowing it. The iron in her stayed, but I watched her see the trap of it, that to clear me on a glimpse was to weaken the very thing that kept her son safe, and that Harlow had built the choice so that her justice and her gratitude pulled against each other. It was the queen who broke the deadlock, and she broke it not as a fond woman but as a queen, which was why it held. Then we will not decide it on a glimpse, she said. Lord Steward, you are right that the Cresset mark cannot be set aside on a fright, and right that a glimpsed coat overturns nothing. So we will not overturn anything on it. We will find the coat. She turned her head, and her eyes went down the ranged officers and came to rest, for one heartbeat too long to be accident, on a man at the far end of the dais who had not spoken a single word the whole morning. A gray coat of better cloth than the stores buy does not unmake itself. A weapon does not melt. A man does not walk through a wall. Something is in this palace that should not be, and someone in this palace knows what it is. This inquiry is suspended, not closed, suspended. Sergeant Carrow is confined to barracks, his case unjudged, until we have searched this house to its stones. If nothing is found, the Lord Steward shall have his finding, and I will not stay his hand. But if something is found, and here the iron came all the way up into her voice, then this court will sit again, and it will sit on a different man. She did not look at Harlow when she said it. She looked at the silent man at the end of the dais. I followed her eyes, and for the first time since the night before, I looked full at the face of the chamberlain of the wardrobe, Sir Edrin Mallow, the man whose office issued the household greys, who had sat 4 paces from the boy, while his commissioned coat came up the south passage, and I saw him meet the queen's gaze with the calm, untroubled, faintly grieving expression of a loyal servant who had nothing whatever to hide. And I knew, with the same cold certainty that had told me the cloth was lying, that I was looking at the man who had built all of it, the keyed door, the dyed coat, the chosen hour, and that he was not afraid, and that I had just learned the most dangerous thing of all about him. He had wanted the inquiry to find nothing, but he was not afraid of it finding something, which meant that whatever it found, he had already decided where it would point. And it would not point at him. They searched the palace for 3 days. I heard it from the barracks, the way I heard everything now, the muffled life of the house through stone, and the reports Den brought me when he could come without being marked. The Queen had given the search to Sergeant Aller and a picked detail, deliberately not to the Lord Steward's men, and Aller went at it with the dogged thoroughness of a man who had drilled me himself, and did not in his heart believe his best pupil had cracked. They turned over the south passage, and the laundry court, and the kitchen stair. They counted the household grays against the wardrobe store's book. They sounded the panels and lifted the floorboards of the gallery. And on the third day, they found something. I want to be careful here because this is the part where the trap was sprung, and a man telling it afterward, knowing how it ends, can make himself sound wiser in the moment than he was. I was not wise in the moment. In the moment, the news nearly broke me. What they found was the weapon, a long knife of gray-blue steel, the kind that takes a wicked edge and shows little shine, exactly the dull gleam I had seen under the loose cloth. It was found wrapped in oiled rag and pushed deep behind a loose stone in the wall of the south passage, just where a fleeing man might have thrust it if he meant to be rid of it quickly. So far, so good. So far it was the proof of me, the hard object that turned my glimpse into a fact, the thing that should have ended Harlow's kind, cruel theory of the unstrung sentry. But it had not been left to prove me. It had been left to ruin me. Because wrapped with the knife in the same old rag behind the same loose stone was a purse of crown gold, and folded around the purse was a paper, and the paper was a letter, unsigned, in a clerk's careful hand. And the letter spoke of a payment made and a service rendered, of a door that would be open and an hour that would be quiet, and of a man inside the watch who would, for his share, stand where he was told and look the other way. A man inside the watch. Do you see how it was made? It was beautiful in the cold way that the worst things are beautiful. For 3 days I had been a sentry who left his mark on a fright, a madman, by Harlow's kind story. Now the search the Queen had insisted on, the search I had prayed for, had turned up a hidden weapon that proved a real intruder, and in the same breath had turned up gold, and a letter that proved the intruder had an accomplice inside the Cresset Watch. And who in the Cresset Watch had been off his mark that night, in the gallery, between the south passage and the council doors, the only man in the palace placed exactly where an accomplice would need to be. The search had cleared me of madness, only to charge me with treason. Den brought me the news in the dark, and he could not look at me at all this time. They're saying, he managed, that you weren't mad and you weren't a hero. They're saying you were paid. That the whole story of the gray coat is the accomplice's cover, that you let him in, kept the gallery for him, and when the doors started to open and you knew you'd be seen, you turned on him to save yourself, drove him off and dressed it up as heroism. The gold and the letter behind the stone, Carrow, the letter names a man inside the watch. It doesn't name you, but you're the man it fits. You're the only man it fits. I sat in the dark a long time after he had gone. This was the false dawn, though I did not have the word for it then. For 3 days I had wanted the search to find the proof, and I had told myself that once the world held the knife in its hand, the truth would be plain and I would be vindicated and restored. The search had found the knife. And the knife had been waiting for me, baited with gold, set behind a stone by a man who had known I would want it found, who had counted on the Queen's justice to mount a search, and had simply made sure the search would dig up not my salvation but my grave. Mallow had not feared the inquiry finding something. He had buried the something himself, and dressed it to point away from the wardrobe and straight into the watch, into me, into the one man whose own broken orders had put him in the perfect place to be the traitor. I understood then the full shape of the thing, and it was worse than an assassination. An assassin who fails has failed, but a scheme that fails forward, that turns its own failure into the ruin of the man who foiled it, that is the work of a mind that loses nothing. If the knife had reached the council, Mallow would have had his dark night's work. It had not reached the council because a sentry had broken his oath to stop it. And so Mallow had simply changed his aim. he would have the sentry instead. He would make the man who saved the crown into the man who sold it, and in doing so he would teach every guard in the palace that to step off the mark was to step into a noose, that the discipline must never, ever bend, and a watch that will never bend is a watch that next time will stand on its stone and let the gray coat pass. He was not trying to kill the queen with that one knife. He was trying to kill the thing in the watch that had stopped the knife. He was trying to kill the breaking of the rules, because the breaking of the rules was the only thing his plan had not been able to account for, and he meant to make certain it never happened again. And the terrible cleverness of it was that I could not fight it without seeming to prove it. Every word I might say, "There was a man, I broke my oath to save them, I am no traitor," was exactly what the letter said the accomplice would say. The truth and the lie had been welded into the same words a second time, and this welding was tighter than the first, because now there was a hard object behind it, a knife and gold and a letter you could hold in your hand, and the world believes a thing it can hold. I had 2 threads left. The first was Den, and the wardrobe store's book, the dyed coat, the special cloth, the commission that I had asked him to find without asking. If the coat had been made by Mallow's office, off the tally, then the same office that issued the lie of the coat could be tied to the lie of the letter, and the thread would run, at last, away from the watch and toward the wardrobe. The second thread was a thing I had not told even Den, because it was the kind of thing a man holds close until he is sure. It was the clerk's hand on the letter. I had not seen the letter, but Den had described it, a careful clerk's hand, even and small. And I had spent 11 years standing outside the Cresset Hall while the council's papers came and went, carried by the mistress of the cabinet, Dorothy Quill, the thin, bright-eyed woman who had begun, these past months, to carry rather more papers than the council seemed to produce. I had noticed that and filed it away the way I filed everything, because noticing without moving is the whole of the art. A mistress of the cabinet writes a careful clerk's hand. A mistress of the cabinet has the council's seals and the council's papers and the council's hours. And a mistress of the cabinet who has begun quietly carrying more than the council makes is a woman carrying something for someone else. The coat was the wardrobe's. The letter, I would wager my disgraced name, was the cabinet's. 2 offices, 1 scheme, and between them the keyed door and the chosen hour and the dyed gray coat and the baited stone, and a sentry in a barrack cell with 3 threads in his hand and no way to pull them, confined behind a door he was not allowed to open, while the men who had built it all walked free in the house above and waited for the second inquiry to hang him. I had broken the rules once, to put my body where the harm was going. I was about to learn whether I could break them a second time, to put the truth where the lie was going, before the lie reached the only people who could still be saved by it. It was Den who turned the first thread, and he turned it the way I had asked, by finding a reason to be near the wardrobe stores that had nothing to do with me. The reason he found was simple and good. The dead season was coming, and the household grays are reissued before the cold sets in, and a guardsman whose own watch cloak had taken a tear had every honest cause to go down to the stores and stand about while a steward's clerk searched the tally for his number. Den stood about a long time. He let the clerk grumble and turn pages. And while the clerk turned pages, Den read them upside down across the counter, which is a skill men of the watch learn without meaning to, from years of standing over other men's desks. He came to me that night with it held in his memory whole, because he had not dared write a line of it down. The store's book tallies 204 household grays, he said, low in the dark of the cell. Issued numbered each against a man's name or a post. All 204 accounted for coats on backs, coats in the press, 2 burned and struck off proper. There is no missing coat, Carrow. The tally is clean. My heart went down. If the tally was clean, the dyed coat had never been a wardrobe coat, and the thread to Mallow's office died in my hand. But Den said, and I heard the smile come into his voice in the dark, the tally is clean because there's a leaf glued. near the back where the spoiled pages go. 2 leaves stuck together at the edge with old paste, looks like a clerk's accident, the kind of thing nobody peels. I'd not have caught it, but the clerk turned past it twice, and the candle showed the double thickness. I asked him, careless, was that a stuck page, and he peeled it without thinking, and there was an entry on the inside leaf, struck through with a single line so you'd read it as a cancelled order. A bolt of grey worsted, better cloth than the household buys, the good worsted they keep for the officers' winter coats, drawn 3 months ago, with no man's name and no post against it. Cut and made up by a tailor whose name I don't know, and the made coat never entered into the issue tally at all. Drawn, struck, glued over, as if it never was. A coat of better cloth than the stores buy, drawn off the books, hidden behind a glued page in the wardrobe's own ledger. Whose order signed for the worsted? I asked, though I already knew. The drawing signed with the wardrobe seal, Den said. Sir Edrin Mallow's office. There's no clearer hand on it than the seal. But Carrow, a seal isn't a man. Mallow will say a clerk drew it, or that the page was glued by accident, or that the worsted went for some honest officer's coat and the tally's just sloppy. A glued page and a struck order, it's a thread, like you said. It points at the wardrobe. It doesn't hang anybody. Not against a knife, and a letter, and a purse of crown gold behind a stone, with your post written all over it. He was right, and we both knew it. I had a coat that pointed at Mallow and a letter that pointed at me, and the world holds the thing it can hold, and the world was holding the letter. So I gave him the second thread. The letter behind the stone, I said. You said a careful clerk's hand, even and small. Den, who in this palace writes the council's fair copies? Who carries the council's papers in and out past my mark, and has done more and more these last months? He was quiet. Then, the mistress of the cabinet, Dorothy Quill. Even and small, I said. I've watched her hand cross my mark 100 times, not read it, you understand. Only seen the shape of it, the way you see a man's walk before you see his face. If the letter behind that stone is in Dorothy Quill's hand, then the letter and the coat come from 2 offices that should have nothing to do with one another, the cabinet and the wardrobe, and the only thing that ties 2 such offices together is a third hand pulling both. And a clerk's letter that frames a sentry, written by the woman who carries the crown's own papers, is not a thread that points at the wardrobe. It's a thread that points at a conspiracy, at more than one office, at a thing planned high enough to reach the cabinet and the wardrobe both. And how, Den said slowly, does a man confined to barracks get the hand on that letter compared to the hand on the cabinet's fair copies, when the letter's locked in the steward's evidence chest, and the cabinet's papers are sealed in the cabinet, and the only men with keys to either are the very men who set the trap? There it was, the whole bitter shape of my confinement. I had the truth nearly in my grip, 2 threads, the coat and the hand, that together would unmake the lie, and I could not close my fingers, because closing them meant doing the one thing again that had cost me everything the first time. It meant leaving where I was placed. It meant breaking the rules a second time. I did not sleep that night. I lay on the barracks cot, and I went over the ground the way a guardsman does, and I came, in the cold hour before dawn, to the decision that this account exists to set down. I could wait. I could be the good Cresset man even now, even broken, even framed, hold my place, keep my silence, trust the second inquiry to be just. That was the rule. That was 11 years of bone. And it would hang me, because the second inquiry would sit on a knife and a letter and a purse of gold, and the Queen herself, just as she was, would not be able to clear a man the evidence so perfectly fit. Mallow had built it so that the rules would do his work for him. The discipline I had given my life to was the very thing he had turned into the rope. Or I could break it again. I could leave my place a second time, not a flagstone now but a locked barracks and a lawful confinement, and go up into the house I knew better than any man alive, and put the 2 threads in the one hand that could pull them, the Queen's, not by stealth that would prove me a traitor. by the only thing I had left that no frame could take from me, the 11 years of trust in my own face, and the truth, told plainly, to the one person in the palace who had already once chosen, against her own justice, to suspend a verdict rather than break an innocent man. The first time I broke the rules, I put my body where the harm was going. The second time, I would put myself where the truth was, and let it cost what it cost. I got up before the watch changed. The barracks under the King's Stair are guarded by men of the watch, my own brothers, and that was both the difficulty and the answer. A stranger could not have passed them, but I was not a stranger. I had stood beside half of them on 100 details, and the man on the cell corridor that dawn was a guardsman named Pell, 10 years served, who had drilled green recruits at my shoulder, and who looked at me through the grate not as men had been looking at me but the old way, the way you look at a wall you have trusted at your back. "They're going to hang you, Carrow," Pell said quietly. "You know that, the whole barracks knows it. Knife, gold, a letter with the watch written in it." He paused. "Half of us don't believe it, the half that served beside you, but believing isn't a key." "No," I said, "it isn't. But Pell, answer me one thing as a Cresset man, not as my friend. The night the gray coat came up the South Passage, if you had stood my mark and seen what I saw, the lying cloth, the metal under the tray, the eyes that came up to yours, and the council doors 20 paces off with the Queen and the boy behind them, would you have held your stone?" Pell was silent a long time. He was an honest man, and an honest man does not answer a question like that quickly. "No," he said at last. "God help me, no, I'd have moved." "Then you already know I'm no traitor," I said. "A traitor stands on his stone. A traitor lets the coat pass. The one thing the letter behind that stone can't explain is the only thing every man in this house agrees I did. I stopped him. I drove him off. A paid accomplice doesn't foil the very crime he was paid to allow. The whole of their case rests on me being a traitor who, alone of all traitors, ruined the plot he was bribed to permit." I put my hand flat on the grate. "Pell, I'm not asking you to free me. I'm asking you to do a Cresset man's duty, which is to put the truth where it needs to be. Take a message to the Queen. Tell her sentry asks 10 minutes under any guard she likes, in chains if she likes, to put 2 things in her hand before the second inquiry sits. A glued page in the wardrobe store's book, and the hand the letter behind the stone is written in. That's all. 10 minutes and 2 threads. If she says no, I'll go to the rope with my mouth shut and never name you, but carry it. For the man you'd have been, the night you'd have moved." Pell carried it. I do not know exactly how he carried it, and I never asked, because a man should not have to give an account of a decency done at his own risk. I know only that he went off his own post at the changing of the watch, a small breaking of the rules, his own, done for the same reason as mine, and that some hours later the door of my cell was opened not by Pell but by Sergeant Aller, with 2 guardsmen behind him and a face I could not read. "On your feet, Carrow," Aller said. "The Queen will see you. Hands where I can see them, and you'll wear these." He held up irons. "Because if I bring you up to her unierend and this goes wrong, it's my neck beside yours, and I've a wife. You'll forgive me the iron." "I'll wear the iron gladly, Sergeant," I said, and I held out my wrists, "if it buys me 10 minutes. They took me up through the house I knew so well, in chains, by the back stairs, and the strangeness of it I will not forget, to walk as a prisoner through the corridors I had guarded as a sentry, past the marks I had stood, past young Carrow holding my own pale flagstone in the Cresset gallery, and looking away from me as I passed. We did not go to the steward's court. The Queen had chosen the ground herself, and she had chosen it wisely. Not the cold court where Harlow held his apparatus of ruin, but the small private cabinet behind the Cresset Hall, where the council's papers were kept, and where, not by accident, the mistress of the cabinet did her work. The Queen was there when they brought me in. So was Prince Joran, standing at her side with his chin up in the brave way, because she had let him come again. So was Sergeant Aller and 2 guardsmen at the door. And so, and I felt the trap close around me when I saw them, because I understood at once what the Queen had done were Lord Steward Harlow, the Chamberlain of the Wardrobe Sir Edrin Mallow, and the Mistress of the Cabinet Dorothy Quill. She had not granted me a private hearing. She had summoned them all. She had brought the accused man up in chains and set him in a room with the very people he meant to accuse, and I saw, in the steel of it, exactly the Queen Saralind of Harrowgate was. She would not clear me in a corner where men could whisper she had been fond and unjust. If I was to be cleared, it would be in the open, against the faces of those I named, with the proof on the table or not at all. She had given me my 10 minutes. She had also made certain they would be the most dangerous 10 minutes of my life, because a man who accuses a Lord Steward and a Chamberlain and a Mistress of the Cabinet to their faces, and fails, does not go back to a cell. He goes to the rope that hour. "Sergeant Carrow," the Queen said, "you asked for 10 minutes and 2 things. You have your 10 minutes. The Lord Steward, the Chamberlain, and the Mistress of the Cabinet are here because whatever you have to say touches the honor of their offices, and no servant of mine is accused behind their back. Say what you came to say." And Sergeant, her eyes held mine, and I read in them both the warning and the faith. Say it plainly and say it true, because there will be no second hearing after this one. I stood in my chains in that warm, small room, with the council's papers in their presses around me and the fire low in the grate, and I did the thing I had spent 11 years learning not to do. I spoke. "Majesty," I said, "I will be plain. On the night in question a man came up the south passage in a gray coat of better cloth than the household issues, died down to pass as poor, carrying a covered tray with a long knife under the cloth. He made for the doors of this council. I left my mark and put my body in his road, and when these doors began to open, he abandoned the work and fled. That is what I did, and the whole palace agrees I did it, and I will set the rest of my account on that one stone, because it is the one stone that cannot be moved. I stopped him. Hold that, Majesty, through everything else that has been laid against me. A man paid to let an assassin pass does not drive the assassin off. The plot needed me to stand still. I did not stand still. Whatever else the knife and the gold and the letter behind the stone are meant to prove, they cannot prove that I helped a crime I am the sole reason failed." I saw Harlow draw breath to answer, and the Queen lifted one finger and he held. "Now the 2 things," I said. "The first is a coat. The household grays are tallied in the wardrobe store's book, 204 of them, every one accounted for, the tally clean. But the tally is clean because there is a leaf glued over near the back, 2 pages pasted at the edge to read as a clerk's accident. Peel them, Majesty, and on the inner leaf you will find an order struck through to read as cancelled, a bolt of fine gray worsted, the good cloth kept for officers' winter coats, drawn 3 months ago against no man's name and no post, made up by a tailor not of the household, and never entered into the issue tally at all. A coat drawn off the books, of better cloth than the stores buy, hidden behind a glued page and drawn under the seal of the wardrobe." I did not look at Mallow. I had learned in the harder service that you do not look at the man you are cornering, you let the room look at him. That coat is the coat that came up the south passage. It was not a household coat lost or strayed. It was made in secret by the office that issues the household's cloth to dress a man as a servant who was no servant. There is your gray coat, Majesty. It did not unmake itself. It was unmade, glued over in a ledger by the hand that made it. The room had gone very still. I knew that stillness. It was the stillness of a court settling its mind, and this time I could not yet tell which way it settled. "And the second thing," the Queen said quietly, "you said a hand." "The letter, Majesty," I said. "The letter found behind the stone with the knife and the gold, the letter that names a man inside the watch, and that has been read to mean me. I have not seen it, but I am told it is written in a careful clerk's hand, even and small. Majesty, for 11 years I stood at the door of this council while its papers passed my mark in and out. I never read one. It is forbidden, and I kept it." But a man cannot help seeing the shape of a hand he watches cross his post 100 times, the way he sees a man's walk before his face. There is one hand in this palace that writes the council's fair copies, even and small, and carries them past the crescent mark, and has carried, these last months, rather more paper than this council has ever made. Now I let the room turn its eyes where they would. I make no accusation I cannot stand behind. I say only this: take the letter from behind the stone, and take a sheet of the cabinet's fair copy, any sheet, and lay them side by side before honest eyes. If the hands are strangers, then I am wrong about the letter, and you may add that to all the rest against me. But if the hands are one hand, then the letter that was meant to hang a sentry was written by the office that keeps the crown's own papers, and a coat from the wardrobe and a letter from the cabinet are two threads from two offices that have no honest reason to be braided together, except by a third hand pulling both. That, Majesty, is the whole of what I came in chains to say. A coat the wardrobe made and hid, a letter the cabinet wrote and buried, and a sentry blamed for the one act, the breaking of his oath, that stood between your son and the knife. I stopped. My 10 minutes were not done, but I had nothing more to add, and a guardsman knows when to fall silent. For a long moment no one moved. Then the mistress of the cabinet, Dorothy Quill, laughed, a thin, light, dismissive laugh, exactly the laugh of a clever person who has decided to treat a danger as an absurdity. Majesty, this is a desperate man's story. He has had 3 days in a cell to invent 2 offices to share his guilt, a glued page in a ledger, a clerk's hand that all clerks share. He asks you to compare a buried traitor's letter against my fair copies, as though a forger could not have studied my hand precisely to do this, as though planting a letter in my hand were not the easiest way in the world for the real accomplice to throw the blame off the watch and onto the cabinet. He is not exposing a plot, Majesty. He is building one in this room, out of a glued page and the shape of a hand. I will gladly lay my copies beside that letter, and when the hands match, as a clever forger would ensure they do, you will see only that someone took great care to ruin me, and the likeliest someone is the man standing before you in chains. It was well done. It was very well done. She had taken my strongest thread, the matching hand, and turned its very strength into proof against me. Of course the hands match. A frame would make them match. And I felt the room hesitate again, because it was a good argument, and a good argument is a kind of armor. But she had made one mistake, and it was the mistake of the clever. She had answered too well and too fast, and about the wrong thing. I had said 2 things, the coat and the hand. She had spent all her cleverness defending the hand. She had not said one word about the glued page in the wardrobe's ledger. And neither had Sir Edrin Mallow. Through all of it, the chamberlain of the wardrobe had stood with the calm, grieved, untroubled face of a loyal servant, and said nothing. And now, as the room hung on Dorothy Quill's clever defense, I watched him, and I let the Queen watch me watching him, and I said the last thing, the thing I had held back for exactly this moment, because the harder service had taught me that you do not corner 2 people at once. You corner them against each other. The mistress of the cabinet defends her hand most ably, Majesty, I said. I notice she does not defend the wardrobe's ledger, nor does the chamberlain. I turned at last and looked full at Mallow. Sir Edrin, I have made no charge against you by name. I have spoken only of a coat your office made and glued over in its own book. So I will ask you the one question the whole of this turns on, and I will ask it as plainly as I know how. The fine grey worsted, drawn 3 months past against no name, struck and pasted over, who ordered it, and for whom was that coat made? And I watched the loyal, grieved, untroubled face of the chamberlain of the wardrobe do the smallest thing. The thing I had been waiting for, the thing no clever answer can prevent, the thing the body does a half-second before the mind can stop it. His eyes went to Dorothy Quill. It was nothing. It was a flick of the eyes, a tenth of a second, the glance a man throws at his partner when a question lands too near the truth, and he does not know what she has already given away. He caught it back at once. He recovered his grieved, untroubled face, and he said smoothly, with just the right note of wounded patience, "Majesty, I have not the least notion what struck order the man means. The store's book is kept by clerks. I do not turn its pages. If a worsted was drawn and cancelled 3 months ago, that is a clerk's business and a clerk's error, and I will have the clerk before you within the hour to explain it. I will not dignify the rest, the made coat, the secret tailor, because it is invention. The man is drowning, Majesty, and he is reaching for any office he can pull under with him." It was a good answer. It would have served against most accusers in most rooms. But he had looked at Dorothy Quill, and the Queen had seen it, because I had set it up so she could not miss it, and a queen who has watched courtiers lie to her face for 20 years knows what a man's eyes do when they betray him before his mouth can. I saw her see it. I saw the last weight settle in her, and I knew, before another word was spoken, that the room had finished turning, and that it had not turned the way Mallow and Quill had built it to turn. The Queen did not raise her voice. She never did in the moments that mattered. She turned her head to Sergeant Oller and she said, "Sergeant, the evidence chest from the steward's court, the letter found behind the stone. And from this room," she gestured without looking at the presses around us, the very presses of the cabinet, a sheet of the mistress of the cabinet's fair copy, the most recent. Bring both and lay them on this table side by side, where every person in this room can see." "Majesty," Dorothy Quill said, and for the first time the lightness had gone out of her voice, "I have already said I will gladly." "You have," the Queen said, "and I am glad of it. Then there is no reason to wait." Oller went. The room held its breath, and I want to set down here the thing I felt in those minutes, not triumph, because nothing was yet won, but the strange calm of a man who has put the truth where it needs to be and can do no more. I had said my piece. I had spent my 10 minutes and my last thread. Whatever the two papers showed when they were laid together, I had done the whole of what a man in chains could do, and the doing of it had cost me the last shred of the discipline I had lived by, and I found, standing there, that I did not regret it. I had broken the rules to save the Queen and the boy from the knife. I had broken them again to save myself from the lie. And both breakings had been, in the end, the same act, the putting of a man's body, or a man's truth, between the harm and the people the harm was coming for. The rules had never been the honor. The rules had only ever been the usual shape the honor took. When the shape and the honor came apart, a man had to choose the honor and let the shape go and pay for it. That was the whole of what I had learned in 11 years on a pale stone, and I had not known I knew it until the night I stepped off. Oller came back. He laid the evidence chest on the table and opened it and drew out the letter, the careful clerk's hand, even and small, that had been written to hang me, and he laid it flat. Then he laid beside it the sheet of the cabinet's fair copy, fresh from the press at our elbows, in the hand of the mistress of the cabinet. And the two hands were one hand. There was no mistaking it, and there was no forger's defense that could survive the seeing of it, because Dorothy Quill had made the defense herself before the papers were laid down. She had said the hands would match, and dared us to read the matching as proof of a frame. But standing over the two sheets, the Queen did the thing that unmade that defense entirely. She did not look at whether the letters matched. She looked at the flaws. "This letter," she said, and her finger moved over the buried page, "shapes its lowercase d with a broken back, the upstroke lifted and rejoined, a little gap here and here and here. A clerk does not forge a flaw. A clerk forging a hand copies the look of it, the lean and the loops. He does not reproduce the private accidents, the gap a writer's own hand makes without knowing it makes them, the same gap in the same place 100 times across a page." Her finger crossed to the fair copy. "Here is the broken back again, here and here. The same accident, the same place, the same hand, not a forger's careful copy of a look, but the unconscious signature a writer cannot help and cannot hide because she does not know she is making it." She straightened. "No forger studying your hand from the outside, Mistress Quill, could know to break the back of every, because you do not know you do it. Only the hand that wrote the one wrote the other. This letter is yours. You wrote the letter that was meant to hang my sentry for a crime he stopped." The room had stopped being a court that might break me. I felt it go, all at once, the whole weight of it lifting off and settling onto the two who had built it. Dorothy Quill did not break gracefully. The clever rarely do. They have lived so long inside the belief that they are the cleverest in the room that the proof otherwise undoes more than their plan. "It is still nothing," she said, and her voice had climbed thin and fast. "A letter in my hand proves a letter in my hand. It does not prove a plot. It does not tie me to a coat or a door or a knife. You have a sentry's story and a clerk's letter, and between them there is no." "There is the coat," I said quietly. "And the chamberlain of the wardrobe, Sir Edrin Mallow, who had stood silent and untroubled through all of it, who had given away the whole game with a single flick of the eyes, and then tried to glue it back together with a clerk and a denial. Sir Edrin Mallow made the second mistake of the day, and it was the mistake that ended him." He turned to Dorothy Quill, in front of the Queen, in front of the room, and he said, low and furious, forgetting for one fatal instant that they were no longer alone in their scheme. "You wrote it in your own hand. I told you to have a clerk write it, I told you." The words fell into the room and could not be called back. He heard them land. I saw the instant he understood what he had done, saw the untroubled mask come off all at once, not slowly but all at once, the way a thing breaks rather than bends, and after that there was no more cleverness in the room, only the wreckage of it. For there is no defense against a man's own mouth confessing the shape of the plot to his partner in front of the crown. He had not said, "I am innocent." He had said, "You should have hidden it better." The whole architecture of denial, the clerk's error, the glued page that meant nothing, the sentry building a plot out of cloth, collapsed in the space of 9 words, because a man does not reproach his fellow for writing the frame in her own hand unless there was a frame, and he knew there was, and he had helped to build it. Dorothy Quill turned on him then, white with the particular rage of the cornered who watched their partner do the cornering. "Be quiet, you fool!" But it was far too late, and she knew it, and the knowing of it was on her face for everyone to read. The Queen let the silence hold for one long moment. Then she spoke, and her voice was very quiet and very cold, and it was the voice of the crown. "Sergeant Aller, the mistress of the cabinet and the chamberlain of the wardrobe are not to leave this room. Set your men on the door. They will answer, fully and at once, every question I am about to ask, and they will understand that the only mercy left to either of them lies in the completeness of their answers." She looked from one to the other. "I will have the whole of it. The door that was keyed, the man who wore the coat, the knife that was paid for, the hour that was chosen because my son would be in the room, and above all, why. It came out over the hours that followed in pieces, dragged into the light the way such things always are, each of them at last turning on the other in the hope of buying something, and between the two of them the whole black shape of it was laid bare. I was there for the start of it, still in my chains, until the Queen, almost as an afterthought with a glance at Aller, said, "Strike those off him," and a guardsman who an hour before had thought me a traitor knelt and unlocked the irons from my wrists, and I stood a free man in the cabinet of the crown, and did not yet feel free, because the thing was not yet whole. This was the why of it, and I set it down because the Queen asked for the whole truth, and the why is the part that matters most. It was the treasury. It is almost always, in the end, the treasury. The mistress of the cabinet, Dorothy Quill, sat closest of any officer to the flow of the crown's papers, the warrants, the seals, the orders that moved gold from the royal purse to the work of the realm. For 2 years she had been quietly diverting it. A warrant altered here, a payment to a work that did not exist there. A stream of crown gold bled off through false accounts into her own keeping and the keeping of those she had drawn into it. The charitable payments the runners had whispered of, they were hers, a screen of false good works through which the diverted gold was washed clean. She had grown rich and powerful in the shadow of the Queen's own trust, and she had not been alone, because a theft of that size needs more than one office. It needs cloth and disguise and the moving of men unseen. And that was the chamberlain of the wardrobe, Sir Edrin Mallow, whose office could make a coat that lied, dress a man as a servant, and account for the comings and goings of the household. The two of them, the cabinet and the wardrobe, had been braided together for 2 years, bleeding the crown. And then the Queen had begun to look at the books. It was nothing dramatic at first, only that Saralind of Harrowgate was the kind of queen who read her own accounts, and who had started, that autumn, to ask the small, quiet questions that clever thieves dread more than any audit. Why this payment? To whom? For what work? Show me the work. Quill had felt the floor warming under her. She had known that another month, perhaps 2, of the Queen's careful reading would bring the whole diversion into the light, and that when it came into the light she and Mallow would hang. So they had decided to remove the Queen. Not crudely. They were not crude people. That was what had made them dangerous. They had planned a death that would look like an outrage from outside the palace. An assassin in a servant's coat slipped in through a keyed door at a council hour, a knife in the night, and a fled killer never found. A grieving realm, a new regency, the books going quiet under new and friendlier hands. And the hour they chose. This is the part I cannot write without my own hand going still on the page. The hour they chose was the council hour when Prince Joran would be in the room, because a queen and her heir taken together leaves the cleanest succession of all, the smoothest passage to the regency they meant to seize. They had chosen the night the boy would be there. They had built the knife's road to run past a 10-year-old who dragged the toe of his left boot when he was bored. That was the scheme the standing orders of the Cresset Watch would have let pass. That was what waited under the loose gray cloth, and the only thing in the whole careful machine that they had not been able to account for, the one variable their cleverness could not buy or key or forge, was whether the sentry on the mark would do the one thing his orders forbade him to do. He did. I did. I broke Rule 1, and the knife never reached the room, and the boy who dragged his boot went home to his bed that night not knowing how near the dark had come. And a man who loses nothing, a man whose schemes fail forward, turned at once to make the breaking of that rule into my noose, so that no sentry would ever dare break it again. He had very nearly managed it. He had managed everything but the broken back of a d, and a flick of his own partner's eyes, and 9 words spoken in front of the crown. The rest of it came apart quickly, the way these things do once the first thread is pulled. The keyed door was the mistress of the cabinet's doing. She had taken a copy of the south key from the steward's ring weeks before, which was why the thread had pointed so conveniently at Lord Steward Harlow, and why I had distrusted that convenience and set it aside. Harlow, it turned out, had been no part of the scheme at all. He had only been a heavy, prideful man who saw a sentry off his mark and reached, out of his own love of the discipline, and his own appetite for a large, memorable judgment, for the harshest and most convenient explanation. He had not meant to serve Mallow and Quill. He had served them anyway, with his certainty and his full court and his kind, cruel theory of the unstrung sentry, and when he understood in that cabinet how near he had come to hanging an innocent man for the very crime he had foiled, and to doing the conspirators' last work for them, the heavy red drained out of his face and did not come back. He was not a wicked man. He was a man who had mistaken the rules for the honor, which is a commoner and quieter failing, and which had nearly cost 2 lives. He resigned his stewardship within the month. I bear him no grudge. He was, in his way, the whole lesson of the thing made flesh. That a man who loves the rules more than the thing the rules are for can be used by wicked men as surely as a keyed door. The man in the gray coat was taken 3 days later at a river in 2 days' ride from the capital, on the description I had given, and the trail the cabinet's own diverted gold left behind it, for such men are always paid, and payment is always a thread. He was a hired blade from outside the realm, exactly the outrage from outside the scheme had been built to look like, and he answered for what he had been hired to do. As for the mistress of the cabinet and the chamberlain of the wardrobe, they answered to the crown's justice, in the open, before the realm, which was the thing the queen insisted upon above all. She would not have it whispered and quiet. She had me write this account and others write theirs, and she had the whole black shape of it read out plainly. The 2 years of bled treasury, the false charities, the keyed door, the dyed coat, the chosen hour, the knife meant for a queen and her boy, and the frame built to hang the one man who had stopped it. She wanted it known. She wanted every officer of her household to understand exactly what had been attempted in the shadow of their trust, and exactly how near it had come, and exactly what had turned it. They were stripped of their offices and their honors and barred forever from the court, and they went to answer for treason against the crown, and the diverted gold was traced and the false accounts unwound, and the realm was the cleaner for it. I will not dwell on their punishment. It was just, and it was the crown's to give, not mine, and a guardsman who has done his duty does not feast on the ruin of the men he brought down. That, too, is part of the discipline, the part that stays even when the rest is broken. There remained the matter of me. I had broken Rule 1 of the Cresset Watch. I had left my mark. I had spoken on my post. I had broken out of a lawful confinement and forced my way, in chains, into the presence of the crown to accuse 3 of her officers to their faces. Every one of these was a true charge, and the queen, being just, did not pretend they were not. The standing orders of the watch are the crown's own safety, and they cannot be set aside lightly, and a queen who simply forgave a sentry for breaking them, even this sentry, even for this reason, would have weakened the very thing that had so nearly failed her son. So she did not forgive me. She did something harder and better, and it is the last thing I will set down. She convened the watch, the whole of the Cresset Watch, every man, in the great court where the discipline of the household is given, and she had the standing orders read out. Rule 1 first. The sentry does not leave his mark, and then she had my account read after them, the whole of that night, the lying cloth and the metal under the tray and the eyes that came up to mine, and the choice I made in 4 seconds with the council doors 20 paces off. And when both had been read, she stood before the assembled watch and she said this, and I have it by heart, and will to the end of my life. The first standing order of this watch is the keystone of the crown's safety, and it will stand. Let no man here believe it has been weakened. A sentry holds his mark, and the holding of it is his honor, and 99 knights in 100, 999 in 1,000. The holding of it is also the whole of his duty, and the two are one thing, and a man need never choose between them. But there is 100th night. There is 1,000th night, when the rule and the thing the rule was made to protect come apart, and the order would have a man stand still, and watch the harm walk past him to the very heart he was set to guard. On that night, and only on that night, and woe to the man who claims it lightly, a sentry's honor is not in the rule. It is in the thing the rule was made for. Sergeant Carrow read the difference correctly on a night when reading it wrong would have cost me my son. He paid for the reading. He paid in his place, his peace, his good name, and very nearly his life, and he never once asked to be spared the paying. That is not the failure of the discipline. That is its highest form, the man who keeps the order 10,000 times because it is right to keep it, and breaks it the one time it is right to break it, and stands ready to answer for the breaking with his life. I will not have such a man broken. I will have him honored. And I will have every man of this watch understand that the order is held by men, not by stones, and that a man is exactly the thing a stone is not. A man can tell the 100th night from the other 99. Hold your marks. Hold them faithfully all your lives. And pray you never see the night that asks you to step off, but if it comes, may you read it as well as he did. Then she did a thing no Queen of Eldermoor had done in the memory of the watch. She came down off the dais, and she crossed to where I stood, and she returned to me with her own hands the silver gorget that had been taken from me when they marched me off my mark. And beside it she said a second thing, a plain dark ribbon with no jewel and no gold, the Queen's own mark of honor, given for a life set at risk in the crown's defense. And young Prince Joran, who stood beside her with his chin up in the brave way, said, in a voice that climbed and cracked and held, I told them you weren't mad. And I, who had not spoken on my mark in 11 years and had wept perhaps twice in my whole life, found that I could not quite answer him, and only put my hand to the gorget at my throat, and bowed my head to the boy whose dragged boot I had heard on the threshold the night the dark came near, and was glad past all telling that I had heard the other footstep too. I stand my mark still. I am older now, and the 11 years are more, and there is a young prince grown taller who is not bored at council any more, and a princess at his side who carries her gravity the way she always did. I hold my pale flagstone in the Cresset gallery through the long quiet hours, and I keep the two kinds of watch, the one the orders describe, and the one no order can, the listening to the shape of the building so that the wrong note when it comes will land on me like a struck bell. I have not stepped off the stone again. I do not expect to. The 100th night is rare, and most men go a whole faithful life and never meet it, and that is as it should be. But I know now what I did not know before that autumn, that the stillness is not the honor. The stillness is only the shape the honor takes on the 99 nights. The honor itself is a living thing, and it lives in the man and not the stone, and on the one night in 1,000 when the harm comes for the people you are set to guard and the rule would have you watch it pass, on that night, a guardsman finds out what he truly is, not by the rule he keeps, by the rule he is willing to break and to answer for with everything he has. I broke my oath once, for the queen and the young prince. I would break it again, and I pray with the whole of my disciplined and unquiet heart that I never have to, and that if I do, I hear the footstep in time.